Hey, you know what it's time for? The Zuffa Boxing update. Yeah, you guys, I look, I do like Zuffa Boxing. I like what they're doing. Obviously, the rumors that he was never going to work with other promoters is false because, as you know, Zuffa Boxing signed a long-term deal not only with Paramount here in the States, TV deal, in a streaming deal, but not only with Paramount here in the States, which is huge, he also signed a deal in the UK with Sky Sports. Now, if you recall, those Brits, the British promoters, all used to do Sky Sports too. They jumped on the Zone, and somehow Dana and Zuffa Boxing got the deal. Well, their first card that they're putting on Sky Sports in UK is June 6th, and the main event is one of Zuffa Boxing's fighters, Billiam Smith, and he is going to be taking on Riziki. Now, Riziki, my whole point here, Riziki is a tough cat. There's no question. But my whole point here is Riziki's promotional team is tickled pink that they're working with Zuffa Boxing. Lions Den Promotions is who they are, and they're tickled. They're happy. They're glad that they're working with Zuffa Boxing. So I mean, look, and Billiam Smith, he's making a mistake of looking past Riziki, but Chris is already calling out Jay Apatea. And Jay Apatea, what does he have? He's got the Zuffa Cruiserweight world title. So yeah, Zuffa Boxing, they seem to be one step ahead of the promoters every time we turn around. And speaking of that, next week they have their next card, which is taking place May 10th. It's Zuffa 6. Obviously, he's doing the same thing that he did with UFC. And, it's going to be a pretty decent competitive card. When you look at these guys that he has on these cards, they may not be, the Tyson Furies or the huge names yet, but they're very competitive fights. So you know that when you tune in to these fights, that you're going to get treated to an entertaining fight. And, this fight is no difference. Shane Mosley Jr. Is taking on Serhii Boachuk, which is going to be a pretty entertaining fight. Are they both undefeated? No. Shane Mosley Jr. is 22-5 with 12 knockouts, and Boachuk is 27-3 with 24 knockouts. It's in the middleweight division. It's the main event. The co-main is Julian Rodriguez, 25-1 with 15 knockouts in the welterweight division, and he's taking on James Perella, who's 21-0 with 15 knockouts as well. And then they also got Michelle Rodriguez, 16-0 with 8 knockouts, taking on Andrios Karizorkis in another middleweight fight. And Karizorkis is 16-0 with 11 knockouts. So, I mean, at least on paper, these fights really look competitive. And I'll tell you, so far, the fights that we have seen from Zuffa have been competitive. And after all, that's what I'm into, man. That's what I'm into, boys and girls. I'm into competitive fights. I can't stand tuning in to a fight that's not competitive. Was Jarrell Miller and Lanier Perro an entertaining fight? Shit, yeah, it was. It was an entertaining fight. It was a disappointing fight for Team Perro, but it was an entertaining fight. And I like that. It didn't have to be for a title. This whole misconception of fights being has to have a title attached to them is it's a crock of what. The reason fighting was so popular in the earlier years, specifically, hey, listen, the TV years for boxing was in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s. In the 50s and 60s, there was so much boxing on television, and there was only like 3 channels, and I'm not kidding you. There was so much boxing on television. Well, the thing is back then they wouldn't be able to broadcast as broadly. so because of the broadcast technique. So, from town to town, or, location, maybe a state, they can only broadcast this to a certain degree, like a radio station could only reach a certain territory. And that was similar to the way television was broadcast. So there may have been 3 stations here, 4 stations there, but boxing was on a lot of these stations on different nights. I mean, it was like there was boxing every night. They actually used to have to put out a boxing television guide that would show you the fights that were coming up on TV, that was scheduled to be on TV. So, that was the TV age, and those fights were entertaining. Guys didn't always win. They weren't all undefeated. They weren't cherry picking fights. They were fighting the next guy in line. Plus, I mean, to get a title shot was a lot more difficult than it was today. And I just feel that some of these Zuffa matchups are throwbacks to that. Coach is saying CBS, NBC, ABC, Wild World of Sports, free TV. Yeah, the truth of the matter is I got to see some of the best fights on Wild World of Sports in the afternoon. Listen, one of the first fights I ever remember watching, was Muhammad Ali fighting Jimmy Young. And I'm 99% sure that was an ABC Wide World of Sports fight. And it was on during the day, and on a Saturday. And I remember watching that fight, thinking Jimmy Young beat him. And Ali got the title. Kept the title. He had the belt. But some other fights on this light heavyweight in the light heavyweight division, Surrey Matumovic is taking on Rafael Mani. Matumovic is 8-1 with a draw, and 6 of his wins coming by knockout, and Mani is 9-0 with 3 knockouts. Again, I honestly have never heard of these two fighters, but records kind of tell me that it's going to be entertaining. At least they look good on paper. Justin Villora, 12-0 with 8 knockouts against Ivan Ortiz, who's 12-0 with a couple of draws and 9 knockouts. That's in the lightweight division. Also in the heavyweight division, Demazion Van Hooter, he's 11-0 with 8 knockouts, taking on a guy I know you've heard of if you follow boxing, Raphael Murphy. He's 18-1, and that's an 8-round heavyweight fight. In the bantamweight division, Alexis Alvarado, 9-1 with a draw and 5 knockouts, taking on Emilio Cardenas, who's 10-0 with 4 knockouts. I mean, every one of these fights seem competitive, except for this one. Rakamatulio Boymatov is making his pro debut, and he's stepping in the ring with Al Stanton, who's 9-1 with 6 knockouts in the light heavyweight division. I'm not familiar with either one of these two fighters, but I would bet dollars to donuts that Boy Makatov is an experienced amateur fighter. So we'll see what happens. But again, this is the May 10th Zuffa Boxing card, and we already heard that Chris Billiam-Smith is taking on Rizicki in the Zuffa inaugural United Kingdom event, which is taking place on June 6th. So I would imagine that would be the Zuffa Boxing 7. And, I just think that this is going to be a knock'em sock'em fight as well. And like I said, Chris Billiam-Smith is already calling out Jay Apatea for a shot at his belt. I got Coach in the chat room here. Just give a shout out to everybody in the chat room. I haven't even glanced over there. I've been trying to look straight ahead. People tell me, I watch your show and you're always looking down. You're always looking down. Well, let me explain. Let me tell you why, boys and girls, because my camera is right there. I'm pointing at the camera, right? So I look at the camera, right? But when I have a guest on, he's on my screen. You see him, but he's on my screen or she's on my screen. So when I'm talking to them, I'm looking at them. And I think it's weird if I look up and I'm doing this and I can't do anything else when so that's why. So I'm trying to make it that I'm not looking down all the time. But